The camera slows as Vivian Harper walks through the gleaming glass doors of Westbrook International, her shoulders squared against the weight of invisibility. For 3 years, she has been the ghost of the 32nd floor. Brilliant, dedicated, and completely overlooked. The marble lobby echoes with her solitary footsteps as she clutches her portfolio tighter, containing the architectural designs that could revolutionize the company's latest luxury development in Dubai. Designs her supervisor will present as his own in exactly 27 minutes. Across the atrium, through the wall of windows overlooking Manhattan, Alexander Westbrook's helicopter descends onto the rooftop helipad. The CEO, notoriously ruthless, impossibly handsome, and entirely out of reach, has returned early from Tokyo. Vivian doesn't notice the text message alerting all employees until her phone buzzes against her silk blouse. Nor does she notice the security camera capturing her quiet moment of vulnerability as a single tear trails down her cheek, the skyline reflecting in its path. A tear that will become the most viewed image in the company's history by tomorrow morning. The morning light sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Westbrook International's 32nd floor, catching the edge of Vivian Harper's drafting table and illuminating the precise lines of her latest architectural rendering. Her fingers, adorned only with a thin gold band that had belonged to her grandmother, moved with practiced precision across the tablet screen, adjusting the angle of the rooftop infinity pool that would overlook the Persian Gulf. The Dubai Crescent was to be Westbrook's most ambitious luxury hotel project to date, a sweeping crescent-shaped structure of glass and sustainable materials that seemed to emerge from the azure waters like a mirage. "Harper, is that presentation ready yet? We've got exactly 45 minutes before the executive meeting." Bradford Pierce's voice carried the practiced smoothness of old money and inherited confidence. At 42, he had mastered the art of taking credit for the work of those beneath him, particularly Vivian's. His salt and pepper hair was expensively cut, his custom Tom Ford suit a silent announcement of his family's position on Manhattan's social register. "Just finalizing the 3D renderings now," Vivian replied, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "I've included the sustainability metrics you requested and the material cost projections." Bradford barely glanced at the stunning designs that had kept Vivian in the office until 3 in the morning for the past week. "Just send it to my email. And remember, this presentation needs to impress Westbrook himself if he bothers to show up. We can't afford another Dubai project going to Montgomery and Associates. These designs incorporate everything the client specified," Vivian said, rising from her chair with a quiet dignity that seemed out of place among the frantic energy of the open-plan office. At 31, she possessed a grace that made her stand out even as her colleagues seemed determined not to see her. "The structure is not only visually iconic, but reduces energy consumption by 28% compared to conventional designs." Bradford was already walking away, his attention captured by the blonde intern who had started the previous week. "Just send the file, Harper," he called over his shoulder. Vivian watched him go, her dark eyes reflecting both resignation and determination. 3 years at Westbrook International had taught her that architectural brilliance was secondary to office politics, a game she refused to play even as it cost her the recognition she deserved. "He's going to take credit for your work again," said Zara Kingsley, sliding her chair closer to Vivian's desk. As the marketing director for the international division, Zara was one of the few who recognized Vivian's talent. "You should say something this time." Vivian's fingers traced the edge of her tablet, her midnight blue blazer a stark contrast to the cream silk blouse beneath. "And what would that accomplish, Zara? Bradford's family has connections to half the board members. And you have more talent in your little finger than he has in his entire overpaid existence," Zara insisted, her British accent becoming more pronounced as her indignation rose. "The Dubai Crescent is entirely your vision." Everyone knows Bradford couldn't design his way out of a paper bag. A faint smile touched Vivian's lips. Everyone except Alexander Westbrook, who's the only one who matters in this equation. The mere mention of the CEO's name sent a ripple of awareness through the nearby cubicles. Alexander Westbrook was more myth than man to most employees, the brilliant, ruthless heir who had transformed his family's traditional real estate company into an international powerhouse of innovative architectural development. At 38, he had graced the cover of Business Elite 3 times and was rumored to have turned down a 4th, claiming he was bored with talking about success instead of creating it. "Word is he's flying back from Tokyo today," Zara whispered conspiratorially. Apparently the Nakamura deal closed ahead of schedule. Vivian focused on gathering her materials, ignoring the flutter of something dangerous in her chest. In 3 years, she had encountered Alexander Westbrook exactly twice, once during her initial interview, when his penetrating grey eyes had assessed her portfolio with unexpected thoroughness, and once in the elevator last winter, when he had been too absorbed in a phone call to notice her presence beside him. "The Nakamura deal doesn't concern our department," Vivian said, though she had followed the negotiations with interest. The partnership would expand Westbrook's presence in the Asian market significantly, a strategic move she had predicted in a report that Bradford had also presented as his own. "That's not the point," Zara rolled her eyes. "The point is that the gorgeous, eligible CEO might actually be in the building for your presentation." "Bradford's presentation," Vivian corrected, sliding her tablet into her leather portfolio case. A notification chimed across multiple computers simultaneously, followed by the distinctive buzz of Vivian's phone against her desk. She glanced at the screen. All staff, CEO returning to headquarters at 10:30 a.m. Executive meeting moved forward to 11 a.m. sharp. Department heads required to attend with full presentations ready. The office erupted into a flurry of activity, ties straightened, lipstick reapplied, papers shuffled into neater piles. Vivian alone remained still, her expression unchanged as she calculated the implications. Bradford would be expecting the final files in his inbox immediately. "You've got to be kidding me," Zara muttered. "That's in 20 minutes. Bradford's going to be insufferable now." As if summoned by his name, Bradford reappeared, his face flushed with barely contained panic. "Harper, where are those files? Westbrook's chopper just left JFK. "I'm sending them now," Vivian replied, her calm voice belying the tension in her shoulders. "The presentation is ready to go." Bradford snatched his own tablet from his desk, already rehearsing under his breath. "Vivian could hear fragments about my innovative approach and my vision for the future of luxury hospitality." With methodical precision, she transferred the final files, the culmination of 3 months of research, creative inspiration, and painstaking detail work. The Dubai Crescent was the project that could have put her name on the map. Instead, it would further cement Bradford Pierce's unearned reputation as a visionary. "Send me the backup files too," Bradford demanded, not looking up from his tablet. "And the preliminary sketches." Vivian's fingers hesitated over the screen. The preliminary sketches were in her private portfolio, hand-drawn concepts that revealed her thought process and the evolution of her ideas. They were, in many ways, more personal than the final renderings. "Those weren't part of the deliverables for this presentation," she said carefully. Bradford finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "I need to be prepared for any questions Westbrook might ask. Send them. Now." "Desun." The command hung in the air between them, noticed by several nearby colleagues who quickly pretended to be absorbed in their own work. Vivian was acutely aware of being watched. The black woman challenging the white male superior was always a spectacle, regardless of the circumstances. With deliberate movements, she accessed her personal drive and selected the sketch files. "I'm sending them to your inbox," she said, her voice dropping to ensure only Bradford heard her next words. "But those sketches have my signature, Bradford. They're clearly my work." A cold smile flickered across his features. "Everything you create at this company belongs to Westbrook International, Harper. I'd suggest you remember that if you want to maintain your position here." The threat was barely veiled, but before Vivian could respond, a commotion near the elevator doors drew everyone's attention. The security team appeared first, their earpieces and dark suits announcing the arrival of someone significant. A hushed silence fell over the office floor. Alexander Westbrook moved with the confidence of a man who had never needed to demand attention. It simply belonged to him by right. Tall and broad-shouldered, his presence seemed to compress the available oxygen in the room. His custom-tailored charcoal suit bore no visible brand, but its perfect fit spoke of London's finest tailors. His face, angular and aristocratic, might have been carved from marble, were it not for the intensity in his grey eyes that scanned the office with unsettling focus. "Mr. Pierce," he said, his deep voice carrying easily across the now silent floor. "I understand you're presenting the Dubai Crescent proposal today." Bradford stepped forward, already extending his hand. "Yes, sir. I've just finalized the presentation. It's going to revolutionize our approach to sustainable luxury." Vivian watched the exchange, her face carefully neutral, despite the familiar pain of erasure. Through the wall of windows behind them, Alexander's helicopter sat on the rooftop landing pad, its blades still slowing from the recent landing. The Manhattan skyline stretched beyond, a glittering testament to ambition realized. "I look forward to it," Alexander replied, his handshake brief and professional. His gaze swept the office once more, passing over Vivian without pause, before he continued toward the executive elevator, trailed by his chief of staff and security team. The moment the elevator doors closed, the office erupted into whispers and frantic preparation. Bradford turned to Vivian, his expression triumphant. "Harper, make sure there's a hard copy of the presentation on my desk in 10 minutes, he ordered. "And not a word during the meeting unless I specifically ask for your input." "Is that clear?" Vivian nodded once, her spine straight as the skyscraper she designed, perfectly clear. As Bradford strode away to huddle with the other department heads, Zara squeezed Vivian's arm in silent support. "One day, he'll get what's coming to him," she whispered. "Perhaps," Vivian replied, gathering her materials. "But today isn't that day." She made her way to the printing room, maintaining her composure through sheer force of will. The familiar ache of being unseen, of having her work claimed by others, sat heavy in her chest. Yet beneath it burned a quiet determination that had carried her from a childhood in South Philadelphia to the prestigious halls of Yale architecture, and finally to Westbrook International. Invisible she might be, but Vivian Harper had not come this far to fade away. In the empty printing room, away from watchful eyes, she allowed herself one moment of vulnerability, a single tear that tracked down her cheek as she gathered the pristine pages of her stolen vision. She didn't notice the security camera in the upper corner, its red light blinking as it captured her moment of private pain against the backdrop of Manhattan's unforgiving skyline. She couldn't know that by this time tomorrow, that single captured image would change everything. The executive boardroom of Westbrook International occupied the entire northwest corner of the 45th floor, its curved glass walls offering a commanding view of Central Park and the Hudson River beyond. 24 executives sat around the massive marble table, laptops open and attention fixed on Bradford Pierce as he guided them through the final slides of his presentation. "And as you can see," Bradford said, gesturing to the three-dimensional rendering rotating on the main screen, My design for the Dubai Crescent creates not just a hotel, but an architectural statement about sustainability and luxury coexisting in perfect harmony. Alexander Westbrook sat at the head of the table, one hand absently turning his platinum pen as he studied the images with unusual intensity. His grey eyes narrowed slightly at Bradford's words. The integration of water harvesting technology within the aesthetic elements is particularly innovative, Bradford continued, his confidence growing with each nod of approval from the board members. Who worked with you on this design, Pierce? Alexander's question cut through the room like a blade, quiet, precise, and unexpectedly sharp. Bradford's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. I led the creative direction, of course. My team provided technical support. Alexander set his pen down with deliberate care. The technical support has names, I presume. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. The board members exchanged glances, unused to hearing their CEO express interest in the hierarchical details of design teams. Of course, Bradford recovered smoothly. I can provide the full team roster. Harper handled some of the initial drafting. Edwards on materials, the usual support staff. Alexander's expression remained unreadable as he leaned back in his chair. Continue. For the next 20 minutes, Bradford expounded on projected costs, timeline estimates, and marketing strategies. When he finally concluded with a practiced smile, the board erupted in enthusiastic applause. Excellent work, Pierce, said Victoria Whitmore, the 70-year-old board chairwoman whose family had invested in Westbrook's first development project 4 decades earlier. This could be exactly what we need to secure our position in the Emirates. Alexander remained silent, his gaze fixed on the final image of the Dubai Crescent. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an unusual edge. Thank you for the presentation, Pierce. I'll need the complete files sent to my office. All of them, including preliminary sketches and concept work. Bradford's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, sir. Right away. That will be all for today, Alexander announced, rising from his chair in one fluid motion. Pierce, a moment in my office. The meeting dispersed, with the efficient rustle of expensive fabric and leather portfolios closing. As the board members filed out, Victoria Whitmore paused beside Alexander, her shrewd eyes assessing him. You seem distracted today, Alexander, she said, her voice pitched for his ears alone. The Tokyo negotiations went well, I understand. What's troubling you? Alexander offered a practiced smile that revealed nothing. Just jet lag, Victoria. Nothing to concern yourself with. She studied him for a moment longer, before nodding and making her exit, leaving Alexander and Bradford alone in the vast boardroom. Walk with me, Pierce, Alexander said, already moving toward his private elevator. Bradford followed, his confident facade masking the first flickers of unease. Alexander Westbrook was known for many things, but personal interest in mid-level presentations was not among them. The CEO's office occupied the entire top floor of the building, a modernist expanse of glass, steel, and rare woods that reflected his personal aesthetic of sophisticated minimalism. Alexander moved directly to his desk without offering Bradford a seat, his back to the panoramic view of Manhattan. Impressive presentation, Alexander said, his tone neutral as he accessed his computer. Bradford relaxed slightly. Thank you, sir. I'm particularly proud of the sustainability elements, very forward-thinking. Yes, they are, Alexander agreed, turning the monitor so Bradford could see the screen. Almost as forward-thinking as these. Bradford's blood ran cold. On the screen was a series of hand-drawn sketches, Vivienne's preliminary concepts for the Dubai Crescent, her distinctive signature visible in the corner of each page. Beside them was another window showing a security camera still, Vivienne standing alone in the printing room, a single tear tracking down her cheek as she gathered presentation materials, her portfolio open to reveal the same distinctive sketches. "Would you care to explain?" Alexander said, his voice dangerously soft. "Why, Ms. Harper appears to be the original creator of the designs you just presented as your own." Bradford's mind raced through possible explanations, excuses, deflections. "There appears to be some confusion, sir. Harper is a junior member of my team. All work produced under my direction belongs to the department." "Interesting interpretation," Alexander replied, tapping a key to bring up another document. Vivian's employment contract and portfolio from her initial hire. "Especially given that these same design elements appear in work she created before joining Westbrook International." Bradford's collar suddenly felt too tight. "Sir, with all due respect, the final execution of the Dubai Crescent was entirely under my supervision. Harper merely contributed some preliminary ideas. Stop talking." The command was delivered with such quiet authority that Bradford immediately fell silent. Alexander rose from behind his desk, his height and presence suddenly intimidating in the confines of the office. "I have 27 minutes before my next meeting," Alexander said, glancing at his watch, a discreet Patek Philippe that had belonged to his grandfather. "That gives you exactly 27 minutes to gather Ms. Harper and bring her to this office with her complete portfolio. Not the departmental files, Pierce, her personal design archive." "Sir, I don't think 26 minutes now." Alexander turned back to his computer, a clear dismissal. Bradford stood frozen for a moment before turning on his heel and striding toward the elevator, his mind already constructing damage control strategies. The ride down to the 32nd floor felt endless, each descending number on the display panel marking the progression of his unraveling career. Meanwhile, on the 32nd floor, Vivian sat at her desk, methodically updating the project management software with the post-presentation notes Bradford had hastily dictated before disappearing into the executive elevator. Around her, the office hummed with the usual mid-afternoon energy, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, muted conversations about weekend plans and deadline pressures. Zara appeared at her cubicle, 2 coffee cups in hand and an odd expression on her face. "You might need this," she said, setting 1 cup beside Vivian's tablet. "That bad?" Vivian asked, assuming Zara was referring to Bradford's presentation. "You haven't checked your email in the last hour, have you?" Vivian's brow furrowed as she reached for her phone. "I've been updating the project tracker. Why?" Instead of answering, Zara glanced around before leaning closer. "Chelsea from IT sent something to the entire design department. Well, you should see for yourself." With growing apprehension, Vivian opened her email. At the top of her inbox was a message from Chelsea Williams with no subject line, containing only an image attachment. When the file opened, Vivian's breath caught in her throat. There she was, captured in high definition by the printing room security camera, her moment of private vulnerability exposed for all to see. Worse, her portfolio lay open beside her, the Dubai Crescent sketches clearly visible. The timestamp showed it had been taken that morning, just after Bradford had demanded the presentation files. "Who else received this?" Vivian asked, her voice barely audible. Zara winced. "The entire design department, and apparently someone forwarded it to executive staff with a note about whose work was actually being presented today." Vivian closed her eyes briefly, mortification and anger washing over her in alternating waves. "Why would Chelsea do this? Word is she and Bradford had a thing going until he moved on to the new intern," Zara explained. "This might be her twisted version of justice." Before Vivian could respond, a hush fell over the office floor. Bradford had emerged from the executive elevator, his normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled, his expression thunderous as he scanned the room, his eyes locked on Vivian. "Harper," he barked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Bring your complete portfolio to Westbrook's office. Now." Conversations halted mid-sentence. Keyboards fell silent. Every eye in the vast open plan turned toward Vivian's cubicle. "What?" she asked, certain she had misheard. Bradford strode toward her, lowering his voice to a furious whisper. "This is your doing, isn't it? You leaked those designs, made it look like I stole your work." Vivian stood slowly, dignity wrapping around her like armor. "I did nothing of the sort. And we both know whose work was presented today. You have exactly 5 minutes to get your portfolio and meet me at the executive elevator," Bradford hissed. "Westbrook wants to see you." The office erupted into whispers as Bradford stalked away. Vivian stood perfectly still, processing the impossible turn of events. "Did he just say Alexander Westbrook wants to see you?" Zara asked, eyes wide. "Apparently." "What are you going to do?" Vivian straightened her midnight blue blazer and reached for her leather portfolio case. "I'm going to show the CEO exactly what I'm capable of creating." The journey to Alexander Westbrook's office passed in a blur of silent elevator rides and tense corridor walks. Bradford maintained a rigid silence, his fury radiating off him in almost visible waves. Vivian clutched her portfolio, not just the Dubai designs, but 3 years of concepts, sketches and renderings that represented her true capabilities. When they finally entered the CEO's domain, Alexander was standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to them, phone pressed to his ear. Without turning, he held up one finger in a universal request for patience. "The structural integrity reports look promising," he was saying, his deep voice filling the vast space. "Schedule the engineering team for next Tuesday." "Yes, the entire team." He ended the call and turned, his grey eyes immediately finding Vivian. For 3 seconds, she counted them in the thundering beats of her heart. Alexander Westbrook simply looked at her, his expression inscrutable. Then his gaze shifted to Bradford. "Thank you, Pierce. That will be all." Bradford stiffened. "Sir, if I could explain—" "That won't be necessary," Alexander cut him off. "You'll be hearing from HR before the end of the day." The blood drained from Bradford's face. "Sir, that will be all," Alexander repeated, his tone making it clear the conversation was finished. Bradford hesitated for one more excruciating moment before turning on his heel and exiting, leaving Vivian alone with the CEO of Westbrook International. Alexander gestured to the sitting area, a collection of sleek furniture arranged around a low marble table. "Please, Ms. Harper, have a seat." Vivian moved with practiced grace, despite the turmoil churning inside her. She chose an armchair that allowed her to maintain eye contact with Alexander as he sat across from her. "I believe we've met before," he said, surprising her. "Twice, actually," Vivian confirmed. "Once during my initial interview 3 years ago, and once in the elevator last December." A hint of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps approval, flickered across his features. "You have a good memory." "I remember important moments." Alexander leaned back, studying her with undisguised interest. "The Dubai Crescent is your design." It wasn't a question, but Vivian answered anyway. "Yes, every element of it." "And this isn't the first time Pierce has claimed your work as his own, I imagine." Vivian hesitated, years of professional caution warring with the unexpected opportunity for honesty. "No, it isn't. Yet you never reported it. To whom should I have reported it, Mr. Westbrook? Bradford Pierce was my direct supervisor. His family has connections to half the board. I'm a black woman from South Philadelphia with student loans and no powerful connections." The words emerged with more heat than she had intended, years of frustrated ambition bleeding into her voice. Alexander didn't flinch from her candor. Instead, he reached toward her portfolio. "May I?" Vivian hesitated only briefly before handing him the leather case. Alexander opened it with unexpected reverence, his expression changing subtly as he began to examine her work. Page by page, he studied her designs, not just the Dubai Crescent, but every project she had poured herself into over the years. "These are extraordinary," he said finally, his voice quiet, "particularly this series for the Singapore vertical garden residences." Vivian's heart skipped. The Singapore designs were her personal passion project, created on weekends and late nights, a concept she had never shared at Westbrook because Bradford had already dismissed Asian markets as oversaturated. "Thank you," she said simply. Alexander closed the portfolio carefully before fixing her with an intense gaze. "Miss Harper, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I expect an equally direct answer." Vivian nodded, bracing herself. "Why are you still here? With your talent, you could be heading a department at any architectural firm in the city. Instead, you've allowed your work to be stolen for 3 years without protest." The question cut closer to her core than she was prepared for. Vivian took a moment to gather her thoughts, determined to maintain her composure. "I stay because Westbrook International builds dreams that last centuries," she finally said. "Not just luxury properties, but structures that transform skylines and reimagine what architecture can achieve. I wanted to be part of that legacy, even if it meant—" She trailed off. "Even if it meant remaining invisible." Alexander finished for her. Their eyes locked across the table, something electric passing between them that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchies, and everything to do with two people seeing each other with unexpected clarity. "Yes," she admitted. "Though I had hoped eventually my work would speak for itself." Alexander stood abruptly, moving to his desk with purpose. "It has," he said, pressing a button on his intercom. "Ms. Chen, please inform the Dubai project team that we'll be making significant personnel changes, effective immediately, and schedule a video conference with Sheikh Al Maktoum for tomorrow morning." Vivian stood as well, uncertainty washing over her. "Mr. Westbrook, I don't understand." Alexander turned to her, his expression more animated than she had ever seen it. "The Dubai Crescent is the most innovative design I've seen come out of this company in years. It deserves to be presented by its true creator." "You want me to present to Sheikh Al Maktoum?" Vivian asked, unable to mask her shock. "I want you to do considerably more than that, Miss Harper." Alexander moved closer, his presence both intimidating and exhilarating. "I want you to lead the entire project as our new Director of International Design." The world seemed to tilt beneath Vivian's feet. "That's Bradford's position." "Not anymore." Alexander's smile transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek that hadn't been captured in any of his magazine covers. "Bradford Pierce has just made the incredibly poor career decision to present stolen work to the one person who recognizes the difference between genuine innovation and borrowed brilliance." Vivian struggled to process the seismic shift occurring in her professional life. "This is happening very fast." "Success often does," Alexander replied. "The question is whether you're ready to step out of the shadows and claim the recognition your talent deserves." Before she could respond, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Westbrook, the board chairwoman is requesting an immediate meeting regarding the Dubai project leadership changes." Alexander never took his eyes from Vivian's face. "Tell Ms. Whitmore I'll be bringing our new Director of International Design to discuss the matter in 15 minutes. A heavy silence fell between them as the magnitude of what was happening settled over Vivian. 3 years of invisibility, and today, suddenly, she stood in the CEO's office being offered the position she had secretly dreamed of but never believed possible. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "My work has been in presentations before." Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Because until today, I never saw the woman behind the designs." He gestured to his computer screen, where the security camera image still displayed her moment of vulnerability. "Sometimes we need to see both the artist and their art to understand the true value of either." He extended his hand to her, not the perfunctory business handshake he had offered Bradford, but a gesture of genuine partnership. "The board isn't going to make this easy, Ms. Harper. The question is, are you ready to fight for what's yours?" Vivienne looked at his outstretched hand, understanding that this moment represented a threshold between her past and a future she had scarcely dared imagine. With a deep breath, she placed her hand in his, her skin warm against his cool palm, the contact sending an unexpected current up her arm. "Call me Vivienne," she said, meeting his gaze with newfound confidence. "And yes, Mr. Westbrook, I've been ready for 3 years." His fingers tightened around hers briefly, his eyes darkening with something beyond professional appreciation. "Alexander," he corrected her softly. "If we're going to revolutionize Dubai's skyline together, I think we can dispense with formalities." As they stood there, hands still joined in the golden afternoon light streaming through the windows, neither could know how this moment would transform not just their careers, but their lives, or that the photograph which had exposed Vivienne's vulnerability would eventually hang, elegantly framed, in the penthouse they would one day share. For now, there was only this: two brilliant minds recognizing each other across the divide of power and privilege, and the first trembling spark of something that felt dangerously like destiny. The boardroom fell silent as Alexander Westbrook entered with Vivienne by his side. Victoria Whitmore's perfectly manicured hand froze mid-gesture, her steel-grey eyes narrowing at the unexpected pairing. Around the polished marble table, 8 board members shifted uncomfortably, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely disguised hostility. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander announced without preamble, "I'd like to introduce Vivienne Harper, Westbrook International's new Director of International Design and lead architect for the Dubai Crescent project." A beat of stunned silence followed before Victoria leaned forward, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Alexander, while I appreciate your enthusiasm, executive appointments typically require board approval, especially for such a high-profile project." "Not according to the company charter," Alexander replied smoothly, pulling out a chair for Vivienne before taking his own seat. "Article 4. Section 12 gives the CEO unilateral authority to restructure project leadership when necessary for the company's creative integrity." Vivienne maintained her composure despite feeling like she'd stepped into the middle of a long-running power struggle. The weight of expectation pressed against her shoulders as she opened her portfolio with steady hands. "Ms. Harper," Victoria said, her voice honeyed with practiced condescension, "while I'm sure you're very talented, the Dubai Crescent represents a $500 million investment. Our clients expect seasoned leadership. Perhaps Ms. Harper should demonstrate exactly why she deserves this position," Alexander suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't merely a suggestion. Vivienne seized the moment, activating her tablet with a practiced gesture. The room's display screens illuminated with her original concept sketches for the Dubai Crescent. "The Dubai Crescent isn't just another luxury hotel," she began, her voice finding its strength in the familiar territory of architectural vision. "It's a statement about the future of sustainable luxury in one of the world's most challenging environments." For the next 15 minutes, Vivienne guided the board through her complete vision, not just the polished renders Bradford had presented, but the underlying structural innovations that made the design revolutionary. She spoke of thermodynamic glass that adapted to desert conditions, of water reclamation systems integrated into aesthetic elements, of how each curve of the building served both beauty and function. When she finished, the silence held a different quality, tinged with reluctant admiration rather than skepticism. "These sustainability metrics," said Jonathan Reynolds, the board's youngest member, "they're significantly better than what Pierce presented." Because they're accurate," Alexander stated flatly. "Ms. Harper's designs reduce energy consumption by 37%, not the 28% Pierce claimed." Victoria's crimson lips pressed into a thin line. "Alexander, a word in private." "Anything you need to say can be said in front of our new director," Alexander countered, his expression unreadable. Victoria's gaze flickered to Vivian before returning to Alexander. "The Pierces have been associated with Westbrook International for 3 generations. Bradford's father sits on the boards of 2 of our partner companies. And yet neither his family connections nor his Ivy League education taught him not to steal another professional's work," Alexander replied, his voice deceptively casual. The meeting continued for another tense hour, with Victoria and her allies raising increasingly technical objections that Vivian fielded with growing confidence. By the time they adjourned, the balance of power had shifted perceptibly, though the war was clearly far from over. "That went well," Alexander commented as they rode the executive elevator down to the 32nd floor. Victoria only threatened to resign twice. Vivian looked at him directly. She wasn't serious. "No," he agreed, a hint of amusement touching his eyes. "Victoria never makes threats she intends to keep, only the ones she believes will be effective." The elevator doors opened to reveal the design department floor in a state of barely controlled chaos. News of Bradford's departure and Vivian's promotion had spread like wildfire. Staff members pretended to work while stealing glances at the elevator. "I'll need you to select your team for Dubai by tomorrow morning," Alexander said, loud enough for nearby employees to hear. "You'll be relocating to the executive floor immediately." Zara appeared at Vivian's cubicle, eyes wide with disbelief, as Alexander nodded a brief acknowledgement before departing. "What just happened?" Zara demanded once he was safely back in the elevator. "The entire office is exploding with rumors. Bradford cleared out his office with security escorting him." Vivian took a deep breath, the reality of her new position finally sinking in. "I've been appointed Director of International Design." Zara's squeal of delight drew even more attention. "I knew it. The moment that photo leaked, I knew something big would happen. Chelsea is practically begging forgiveness for starting this whole thing." "Chelsea didn't start it," Vivian corrected quietly. "Bradford did, the first time he put his name on my work." 2 hours later, Vivienne stood in her new office on the 44th floor, still struggling to process the whirlwind transformation of her professional life. The space was 3 times the size of her former cubicle, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the East River, and enough room for a dedicated drafting area. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Alexander stood in the doorway, his tie loosened slightly after the day's battles. "Getting settled?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "It's a bit surreal," Vivian admitted. "This morning I was updating spreadsheets in a cubicle. Now I have an office larger than my apartment." Something flickered across Alexander's expression, recognition perhaps. "The view helps with the big decisions," he said, moving to stand beside her at the windows. "At least that's what my father always claimed." The mention of his father surprised her. James Westbrook was legendary in architectural circles, a visionary who had transformed a modest construction company into an international architectural powerhouse before his death 5 years earlier. "Did you always know you would take over the company?" Vivian asked, genuinely curious. Alexander's gaze remained fixed on the cityscape. "Nothing in my life has ever been as certain as people assume." The admission, small but significant, shifted something in the air between them. For a brief moment, Alexander Westbrook wasn't the untouchable CEO, but simply a man with his own complicated history. "I should let you get back to work," he said abruptly, the professional mask sliding back into place. "We'll need to video conference with the Dubai team at 7 tomorrow morning." "I'll be ready," Vivian assured him. He paused at the door. "The board will continue to challenge your appointment, Vivian. Victoria has already reached out to our investors, suggesting the project may be delayed. You don't seem concerned." A rare smile transformed his face. "I learned long ago to distinguish between threats and opportunities disguised as threats." With that enigmatic comment, he was gone. Over the next 2 weeks, Vivian's life settled into a new rhythm of executive meetings, late-night design sessions, and increasingly frequent one-on-one consultations with Alexander. The Dubai crescent consumed her days and nights as she assembled a team of the company's most innovative designers and engineers. She was reviewing structural calculations in her office at 11:30 one evening, when Alexander appeared in her doorway, his suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to reveal surprisingly muscular forearms. "You're working too late," he observed, stepping into her office with 2 cups of coffee from the executive kitchen. "Says the man who's still here at nearly midnight," she countered, accepting the offered cup gratefully. "Fair point." He settled into the chair across from her desk. "How are the revisions coming?" "Almost complete. I've addressed all of Sheikh Al Maktoum's concerns about the eastern facade." She rotated her tablet to show him the updated renderings. Alexander leaned forward, his focus absolute as he studied her work. This had become a familiar pattern, these late-night consultations where professional boundaries seemed to soften around the edges, allowing glimpses of the people behind the titles. "The integration with the coastline is seamless now," he commented, his finger tracing the curve where the building appeared to emerge from the Persian Gulf. "This is why your work stood out to me from the beginning, Vivian. You don't just design buildings, you have conversations with landscapes." The unexpected compliment warmed her more than it should have. "My grandfather was a landscape architect," she said, surprising herself with the personal disclosure. "He taught me to see buildings as extensions of their environments, not impositions upon them." "In Philadelphia?" Alexander asked, remembering her earlier reference. Vivian nodded. "South Philly, not exactly the glamorous architectural upbringing people might expect." "People's expectations are usually their most limiting quality," Alexander replied, his voice carrying an undertone she couldn't quite decipher. "My mother was a receptionist at the original Westbrook offices before she married my father. The society pages conveniently forget that part of the family history." The revelation hung between them, a shared understanding of what it meant to navigate worlds where pedigree often mattered more than talent. "We should both get some rest," Alexander said finally, rising from his chair. "The investor call tomorrow will be challenging." Vivian gathered her materials, suddenly aware of the late hour and the inappropriate intimacy of being alone with the CEO in an empty building. "I'll have the updated projections ready by 8. As they walked toward the executive elevator, Vivian noticed Alexander's slight frown as he checked his phone. "Problem?" she asked. "Possibly." His expression turned grim. "There's been unusual access to the Dubai project server tonight, files being viewed by multiple users outside normal working hours." A chill ran through Vivian. "Which files?" "Structural integrity assessments, material specifications, cost projections." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers with shared concern. All the elements that would be most vulnerable to criticism. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, but neither moved to enter it. "You think someone's looking for weaknesses in the design," Vivian said, her mind already racing through the implications. "Someone with access credentials." "I think," Alexander replied carefully, That your promotion made enemies I hadn't fully anticipated. The protective note in his voice triggered something unexpected in Vivian's chest, a flutter that had nothing to do with professional concerns. I should check the files now, she said, already turning back toward her office. If someone's tampered with the specifications... Not tonight. Alexander caught her arm, his touch sending a jolt of awareness through her. I've already locked down the server and initiated a security audit. Tomorrow we'll know exactly who accessed what. The intensity in his eyes made it difficult to breathe properly. They stood too close, his hand still lightly gripping her arm, the empty corridor stretching around them like a bubble of suspended time. Why are you doing this? Vivian asked softly. Taking risks for me, fighting the board. You barely know me. Don't I? Something shifted in his expression, vulnerability briefly replacing authority. I recognized your work the moment I saw it, Vivian. Not just its quality, but its essence. The same passion that drives you to stay until midnight, perfecting a design that most architects would have considered finished weeks ago. His words struck too close to her core, seeing too much of what she had always kept carefully guarded. Alexander. The elevator chimed again, breaking the moment. Alexander released her arm and stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself between them. My driver can take you home, he offered, his voice neutral once more. Thank you, but I have my car, she replied, grateful for the return to safer ground. They rode down in silence, the invisible current between them now impossible to ignore, yet equally impossible to acknowledge. When they reached the parking level, Alexander walked her to her modest sedan, a gesture both gallant and unexpected. Be careful, Vivian, he said as she unlocked her door. Not everyone celebrates true talent. The warning carried an undertone that suggested he was speaking from personal experience. She nodded, suddenly aware of the complex game she had entered, a game with rules she was still learning and stakes higher than she had imagined. Good night, Alexander. As she drove home through Manhattan's glittering canyons, Vivian couldn't shake the sensation that her life had slipped into an alternate reality, one where her designs were finally recognized, where the most powerful man in her industry looked at her as an equal, and where dangers she couldn't yet identify lurked in the shadows of her success. What she couldn't know, was that across town, Bradford Pierce was already meeting with Victoria Whitmore in her Upper East Side penthouse, their shared determination to undermine Westbrook's newest director solidifying into a dangerous alliance. The Dubai client presentation was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Vivian's promotion. The Westbrook International Conference Center had been transformed for the occasion. Models of the Dubai Crescent displayed on illuminated pedestals, digital screens showcasing animated renderings of the completed project, and a scale replica of the Persian Gulf coastline demonstrating how the structure would interact with the natural environment. Vivian stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching raindrops race down the glass while she mentally rehearsed her presentation. Her ivory pantsuit, the most expensive piece of clothing she'd ever purchased, felt like armor against the scrutiny she knew was coming. Nervous? Alexander's voice came from behind her, warm and unexpectedly intimate. She turned to find him watching her with an intensity that had become familiar over their late nights finalizing the presentation. Focused, she corrected, offering a small smile. There's a difference. Indeed there is. He moved to stand beside her close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne, something with notes of cedar and bergamot. The security audit confirmed our concerns, by the way. Vivian's pulse quickened. Someone tampered with the files? Nothing was altered, Alexander clarified, but several people accessed the structural specifications at unusual hours. Bradford Pierce's credentials were used at 2 in the morning last Thursday. That's impossible. His access should have been revoked. It was. Someone in IT reactivated it temporarily. Alexander's expression darkened. That someone has also been terminated. The implications settled heavily between them. For 3 weeks, Vivian had worked tirelessly to refine her designs, addressing potential weaknesses before they could be exploited. The knowledge that unseen forces were actively working against her had kept her in the office until midnight, most evenings. Evenings Alexander increasingly spent working alongside her. Sheikh Al Maktoum's representatives are in the lobby, Alexander said, checking his phone. Victoria is personally escorting them up. Of course she is, Vivian murmured, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve. One last chance to undermine my authority before the presentation begins. Alexander's hand brushed hers briefly, a gesture too deliberate to be accidental, too brief to be inappropriate. She underestimates you. That's her mistake. The touch lingered on Vivian's skin as she gathered her materials. Over the past weeks, these moments of connection had multiplied, small gestures and shared glances that existed in the undefined territory between professional collaboration and something far more dangerous. The conference room doors opened to admit Victoria Whitmore, immaculate in Chanel, leading a delegation of 5 men in perfectly tailored suits. Sheikh Hamdan Al Maktoum, the project's primary investor, entered last. Younger than Vivian had expected, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Your Highness, Alexander stepped forward, greeting the Sheikh with practiced ease. Welcome to Westbrook International. May I introduce Vivian Harper, our Director of International Design and the visionary behind the Dubai Crescent. Sheikh Hamdan studied Vivian with unexpected intensity. Ms. Harper, your reputation has preceded you. Victoria's smile tightened imperceptibly. Sheikh Hamdan, perhaps we should begin with the overview of the project timeline before... I'm most interested in the design concept, the Sheikh interrupted smoothly. Particularly the sustainability elements I've heard so much about. Vivian seized the opening. Then let's begin there, Your Highness. For the next 45 minutes, she guided the delegation through her complete vision, the revolutionary water reclamation systems, the solar integration that would make the structure 70% self-sufficient, the materials chosen to withstand desert conditions while maintaining luxury aesthetics. Sheikh Hamdan asked penetrating questions that revealed a sophisticated understanding of architectural principles. And the structural integrity concerns, he asked finally, his gaze direct. I understand there were some issues raised by the board. Victoria leaned forward. Indeed, Your Highness, our technical team has prepared a separate presentation addressing those very concerns. Vivian felt Alexander tense beside her. This hadn't been on the agenda. Perhaps Ms. Harper should address these concerns directly, Sheikh Hamdan suggested. With respect, Your Highness, Victoria countered. This requires specialized engineering expertise. We've brought in an independent consultant. The conference room doors opened to reveal Bradford Pierce, carrying a leather portfolio identical to the one he had confiscated from Vivian weeks earlier. The shock hit Vivian like a physical blow. Alexander was already on his feet, his expression thunderous. Victoria, what is the meaning of this? The board authorized an independent review of the Dubai Crescent's structural specifications, Victoria replied, her voice dripping with false concern. Given the project's importance, we felt it prudent to ensure every aspect meets our rigorous standards. Bradford stepped forward, offering Sheikh Hamdan a respectful nod before activating the main display screen. Your Highness, while Ms. Harper's aesthetic vision is certainly impressive, I've identified several critical structural vulnerabilities that pose significant risks to both the project timeline and long-term viability. For the next 20 minutes, Bradford methodically dismantled aspects of Vivian's design, highlighting stress point calculations that showed potential weaknesses in the curved eastern facade and material specifications that supposedly wouldn't withstand Gulf region temperature fluctuations. Vivian watched in growing horror as her work was systematically undermined. The calculations being presented weren't her original specifications. Subtle changes had been made, creating vulnerabilities that didn't exist in her actual design. "These are not my specifications," she finally interrupted, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "The stress point calculations have been altered." Bradford turned to her with practiced sympathy. "Ms. Harper, I understand this must be difficult to hear, but the numbers don't lie. Perhaps in your rush to assume leadership of the project, certain details were overlooked." Sheikh Hamdan's expression had grown increasingly concerned. "Mr. Westbrook, these structural issues seem significant." Alexander's voice cut through the tension. "Because they don't exist in the actual design." He turned to Vivian. "Your tablet, please." She passed it to him, their fingers brushing in a moment of silent communication. Alexander connected it to the main display, pulling up the original specification files with their security timestamps. "Sheikh Hamdan, what you're seeing now are the authenticated design specifications created by Ms. Harper and verified by our structural engineering team 3 weeks ago," Alexander explained, highlighting the timestamp data. "You'll notice they differ significantly from what Mr. Pierce just presented." Bradford's confidence wavered visibly. "There must be some mistake." "Yes," Alexander agreed coldly, "a deliberate one." He turned to Vivian. "The security audit showed Mr. Pierce's credentials accessed these specific files 2 weeks ago. The alterations were subtle, but designed to create exactly the structural weaknesses he just presented." Sheikh Hamdan's gaze sharpened with understanding. "You're suggesting sabotage, Mr. Westbrook. I'm stating it explicitly, Your Highness." Victoria rose to her feet. "This is outrageous, Alexander. The board will not stand for these accusations against a respected former employee brought in as a consultant. A consultant who was terminated for presenting stolen work as his own," Alexander interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "A consultant who apparently still had access to our secure servers despite that termination." The room fell silent as the implications settled over the delegation. Sheikh Hamdan studied Bradford's now pale face before turning his attention back to Vivian. "Ms. Harper, can you verify that these original specifications address the concerns raised by Mr. Pierce?" Vivian took a deep breath, centering herself in the familiar territory of architectural certainty. "Absolutely, Your Highness. If you'll allow me to walk you through the actual calculations." For the next 30 minutes, she methodically addressed each point Bradford had raised, demonstrating how her original design had already accounted for and solved the very issues he claimed to have discovered. With each explanation, Sheikh Hamdan nodded with increasing approval. When she finished, he turned to Alexander. "Mr. Westbrook, I believe we've seen everything we need to make our decision." Victoria stepped forward, a last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Your Highness, the board feels strongly that a project of this magnitude requires more seasoned leadership. The board serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholders," Alexander cut in smoothly. "A group that still includes me, Victoria." Sheikh Hamdan's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile. "My family has worked with Westbrook International for 20 years because of your commitment to innovation. Ms. Harper's design represents exactly the kind of forward thinking we seek." He turned to Vivian directly. "We would be pleased to proceed with the Dubai Crescent under your direction, Ms. Harper." The delegation departed soon after, leaving Vivian, Alexander, Victoria and Bradford in a conference room crackling with unresolved tension. "The board meeting tomorrow should be interesting," Victoria commented, gathering her things with brittle dignity. "This isn't over, Alexander." "For Bradford, it certainly is," Alexander replied. "Our legal team will be in touch regarding your unauthorized access to company servers, Pierce." After they departed, Vivian sank into a chair, the adrenaline of battle giving way to exhaustion. "They really thought they could destroy everything I've built in 3 weeks." Alexander sat beside her, closer than professional boundaries would typically allow. "They underestimated both of us." The weight of his words hung in the air between them. In 3 intense weeks, they had evolved from CEO and employee to something undefined but undeniably powerful. Their late nights perfecting the presentation had been filled with moments of connection that went beyond professional collaboration. Shared coffees at midnight, personal revelations offered in the quiet sanctuary of empty offices, and an increasingly electric awareness of each other that neither had acknowledged directly. "We should celebrate properly," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a register that sent warmth cascading through Vivian. "Dinner tonight. My penthouse has a decent view and better privacy than any restaurant in the city." The invitation crossed a line they had been carefully avoiding. Vivian met his gaze directly, recognizing the risk and the promise it contained. That would be inappropriate. "Probably," he agreed, not backing down. 8 o'clock? Against every professional instinct, Vivian heard herself answer, yes. Alexander's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a discreet building in Tribeca, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. Vivian stood at the edge of his living room, a glass of Bordeaux in hand, trying to reconcile this intimate space with the corporate titan she thought she knew. Gone were the power suits and boardroom authority, replaced by dark jeans and a charcoal cashmere sweater that softened his imposing presence. The space around them reflected a different Alexander than Westbrook International's ruthless CEO. Walls lined with architecture books, surfaces displaying artifacts from his global travels, and most surprisingly, a baby grand piano in the corner overlooking the Hudson River. "You play?" she asked, gesturing toward the instrument. "Badly," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile she'd never seen at the office. "My mother insisted on lessons, said it would teach me patience." "Did it?" "Not according to my board of directors." The unexpected humor in his voice drew her further into the room, her professional defenses slowly lowering in this private space. Over dinner, which Alexander had prepared himself, another revelation, conversation flowed with surprising ease. They discussed architectural philosophy, shared stories of university struggles, and debated the merits of traditional versus modern design principles. "You never explained how you recognized my work so immediately," Vivian said, as they moved to the living room afterward, the city lights glittering below them. "Before you ever saw that security camera image." Alexander was silent for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "I've been following your work since your thesis project at Yale." Vivian stared at him, stunned. "That was 7 years ago, before I joined Westbrook." "Yes," he admitted, setting down his wineglass. "Your concept for sustainable urban renewal in historically black neighborhoods caught my attention. It reminded me of another architect whose work focused on community-integrated design." "Who?" Alexander met her eyes directly. "Edward Harper, your father." The name hit Vivian like a physical blow. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years, not since her father's small architectural firm had collapsed amid accusations of financial impropriety when she was 21. "How did you know," she whispered, "that he was your father? It wasn't difficult. You've never traded on the connection, but I make it my business to know the history of everyone in my company." Understanding dawned slowly, painfully. Is that why you promoted me? Some kind of atonement for what happened to my father's firm? Alexander moved closer, his expression intense. Vivienne. Was any of this real? She demanded, hurt crystallizing into anger. Or was I just part of some elaborate game of corporate chess? None of this is a game to me, he said, voice low and urgent. Yes, I knew who you were when you joined Westbrook, and yes, I followed your career because of your father's connection to my family's company. What connection? My father's firm failed because his partner embezzled their operating capital. Westbrook had nothing to do with it. Alexander's expression shifted to one she couldn't read. That's not entirely accurate. What are you saying? He took a deep breath. Westbrook International acquired your father's firm's debt after the embezzlement. My father called in those loans immediately, ensuring the company couldn't recover. The revelation struck Vivienne like ice water. Why would he do that? Because 25 years ago, Edward Harper designed a revolutionary cultural center in Harlem. My father's firm submitted a competing design. Alexander's voice grew quieter. Your father won the commission. My father never forgave being outshone by a small black-owned firm from Philadelphia. Vivienne stepped back, her mind racing to process this revelation. So this, my promotion, the Dubai project, it was all guilt, reparations for your father's actions. No, Alexander moved forward, closing the distance between them. Your promotion was because you're brilliant, Vivienne. The most innovative architect I've ever encountered. But yes, I've watched your career because I wanted to ensure you received the opportunities my father's vindictiveness tried to deny your family. Emotions warred within her. Betrayal at the secrets kept, confusion at the complex history between their families, and something deeper and more dangerous in response to his proximity. I should go, she said finally, gathering her purse with trembling hands. Alexander caught her arm gently. Vivienne, please, there's more you need to know about Victoria's plans for the company, about why she's so desperate to undermine you. Their eyes locked, the tension between them shifting into something electric and undeniable. For 3 weeks they had maintained professional boundaries despite the growing attraction neither could ignore. Now, with truth finally breaking through the surface, those boundaries seemed suddenly dangerously fragile. I can't do this, Vivienne whispered, though she made no move to pull away. Everything is too complicated now. Life is complicated, Alexander replied, his hand moving to cradle her face with unexpected tenderness. This isn't. The first touch of his lips against hers shattered the last of her resistance. The kiss deepened with weeks of suppressed longing, his arms drawing her against the solid warmth of his body as her fingers threaded through his hair. Reality narrowed to this moment, this connection that felt both inevitable and impossible. Neither noticed the flash of a camera from a neighboring building, capturing the CEO of Westbrook International in an intimate embrace with his newest director, an image that would reach Victoria Whitmore's phone before morning dawned. Morning light streamed through Vivienne's apartment windows as she stared at the image on her phone, her coffee growing cold beside her. The photo quality was grainy, but unmistakable. Alexander and herself locked in an intimate embrace in his penthouse, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind them. The message accompanying it was simple but devastating. Sleeping your way to the top is hardly female empowerment, Miss Harper. The board meets at 9. Choose your reputation or your position. You can't keep both. The sender was anonymous, but Victoria Whitmore's fingerprints were all over it. Vivienne's hands trembled as she set down the phone, memories of last night washing over her. After that first explosive kiss, they had talked for hours. Alexander revealing the full history between their families, the manipulation that had destroyed her father's firm, and Victoria's plans to force Alexander out of his own company. 3 sharp knocks at her door jolted her from these thoughts. Alexander stood in her hallway, his expression grim, holding his own phone, displaying the same damning photograph. "You've seen it," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Yes." Vivienne closed the door, conscious of the dangerous intimacy of having him in her personal space. Last night had changed everything between them, blurring professional and personal boundaries in ways that now threatened everything she'd worked for. "They'll use this to invalidate my promotion, my work, everything, only if we let them." Alexander moved closer, the authority she recognized from the boardroom now focused entirely on her. "Victoria's been orchestrating this coup for months. Bradford was just a convenient ally, but this," he gestured to the photograph, "this was exactly the ammunition she needed." "The board meeting is in 2 hours," Vivienne said quietly. "What are we going to do?" "Fight." The word contained all the determination that had built a global empire. "But first, I need to know where you stand." Vivienne met his gaze directly. "What do you mean?" "Last night wasn't just about comfort or attraction for me, Vivienne." The vulnerability in his voice was something few had ever heard from Alexander Westbrook. "I need to know if it was for you." The question hung between them, layered with complications neither had anticipated 3 weeks ago. Vivienne felt the weight of professional ambition warring with personal truth. "It wasn't," she admitted softly, "but that doesn't change the reality of our situation. Victoria will use this to destroy everything I've built. Unless we change the narrative entirely." Alexander reached for her hand, his touch sending electricity through her veins despite the gravity of their situation. "Trust me, Vivienne." 90 minutes later, Vivienne stepped into Westbrook International's main boardroom, her spine straight despite the whispers that followed her entrance. The executive floor had been buzzing with rumors, copies of the damning photographs circulating through secured messaging channels, speculation about her future spreading like wildfire. The board members were already assembled, faces ranging from openly hostile to uncomfortably avoidant. Victoria sat at the far end of the table, triumph barely concealed beneath a veneer of corporate concern. "Ms. Harper," she acknowledged with false warmth, "I'm not certain you were invited to this particular meeting." "I invited her," Alexander's voice carried from the doorway as he entered with his chief legal counsel. As Westbrook International's Director of International Design and the lead architect on our most significant current project, her presence is not only appropriate, but necessary. Victoria's smile tightened. "Alexander, given the circumstances, perhaps some discretion would be advisable." "If you're referring to the illegally obtained photograph being circulated this morning," Alexander replied, taking his seat at the head of the table, "we'll be addressing that shortly. First, I believe you've called this emergency session to discuss leadership concerns." For the next 20 minutes, Vivienne sat in rigid silence as Victoria methodically outlined her case against Alexander's leadership. Declining profit margins in the European division, supposedly questionable personnel decisions, and finally, the inappropriate relationship with a subordinate evidenced by the morning's photograph. "The moral and ethical implications aside," Victoria concluded, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern, "the potential legal liability for the company is simply untenable. The board must consider whether current leadership is acting in shareholders' best interests." Alexander remained unnaturally calm throughout the presentation. When Victoria finally finished, he simply nodded once. "Is that everything, Victoria?" "I believe the facts speak for themselves," she replied, glancing around the table at her allies. "We'll now vote on temporarily relieving you of your duties pending a full investigation." "Before that vote occurs," Alexander said, his voice perfectly controlled, "there are some additional facts the board should consider." He slid a folder to each board member. These documents detail a series of irregular financial transactions over the past 16 months, specifically the systematic diversion of development resources from our Dubai project to Montgomery and Associates. A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. Victoria's complexion paled slightly. "What exactly are you implying, Alexander?" asked Jonathan Reynolds, the youngest board member. "That Victoria Whitmore has been actively working to sabotage our most significant international project while channeling insider information to our primary competitor, a competitor where her son-in-law conveniently serves as CFO. The accusation landed with the impact of a detonation. Victoria surged to her feet. "This is absurd. You're manufacturing distractions to divert attention from your own inappropriate behavior." Alexander remained seated, his calm only emphasizing Victoria's loss of composure. "The company's cybersecurity team has documented over 30 instances where confidential specifications were transmitted from your private server to Montgomery's development team. The timing aligns perfectly with their sudden ability to underbid us on 3 major contracts." Stunned silence fell over the room. Vivian watched the board members exchange alarmed glances as the implications registered. "You can't prove any of this," Victoria insisted, though her legendary composure had fractured visibly. "Actually," Alexander replied, "we can. Ms. Harper?" Vivienne activated her tablet, sending documents to the main display screen. "When I became Director of International Design, I initiated a comprehensive security protocol for all Dubai project files. Each access point was logged and authenticated through a blockchain verification system, standard for high-security projects, but previously not implemented at Westbrook." She highlighted specific entries on the document trail. "These access logs show Victoria Whitmore's credentials were used to extract proprietary design specifications at 2:17 a.m. on 6 separate occasions. The same specifications subsequently appeared in Montgomery's competing bid for the Bahrain waterfront project 3 weeks later." Victoria's face contorted with fury. "You orchestrated this entire charade, using this woman you're sleeping with to fabricate evidence." "That's enough, Victoria." Alexander's voice cut through her accusations with quiet authority. "The board has the evidence. They can make their determination without further character assassination." The next hour passed in a blur of procedural formalities as the board convened privately to review the documentation. Vivienne and Alexander waited in his office, separated by a professional distance that belied the events of the previous evening. "What happens now?" Vivienne finally asked, breaking the tense silence. "Now we see if 30 years of corporate politics outweighs documented evidence of corporate espionage." Alexander's expression revealed little, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his concern. "And us? What happens to us when this is over?" Before he could answer, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Westbrook, the board requests your presence. Miss Harper is to accompany you." They returned to find the boardroom reconfigured, Victoria conspicuously absent, security personnel standing by the doors, and the remaining board members arranged in a more formal configuration. Jonathan Reynolds, now seated at the position traditionally occupied by the board chair, addressed them as they entered. "Mr. Westbrook, the board has reviewed the evidence and found it compelling enough to temporarily relieve Ms. Whitmore of her duties, pending a full investigation." A wave of relief washed over Vivian, though she maintained her professional composure. "However," Jonathan continued, "the matter of your relationship with Ms. Harper remains problematic from a governance perspective." Alexander straightened, his expression hardening. "My personal relationships are not subject to board approval, Jonathan. When they involve a direct report in a company facing potential sexual harassment liability, they absolutely are," Jonathan countered, The board acknowledges Ms. Harper's exceptional contributions, but the optics of this situation cannot be ignored. Vivian felt the ground shifting beneath her feet once more. They had overcome Victoria's sabotage only to face the consequences of their own actions. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Alexander asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "That we have a simple choice," Jonathan replied. "Either Ms. Harper steps down from her position to remove the conflict of interest, or you recuse yourself from any direct oversight of her department. The Dubai project would be reassigned to ensure proper corporate governance." The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Vivienne stared straight ahead, her mind racing through the implications. Either she sacrificed her hard-won position, or Alexander surrendered control of the company's most significant project. "There is a third option," Alexander said finally, his voice carrying an authority that commanded every eye in the room, one that resolves the governance concerns while preserving both Ms. Harper's position and the integrity of the Dubai project. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "We're listening." Alexander moved to stand at the center of the boardroom, his presence filling the space with undeniable power. Westbrook International was founded 70 years ago on a principle my grandfather established, that architectural innovation should never be constrained by conventional thinking. He gestured toward the portraits of former company leaders lining the boardroom walls, all male, all white, all bearing the unmistakable confidence of inherited privilege. "For 7 decades, this company has been led by men who looked remarkably like each other," he continued. "Men who built magnificent structures while maintaining less admirable traditions within these walls." Vivian watched him with growing confusion, uncertain where this unexpected history lesson was leading. "What the board may not know," Alexander said, turning to face them directly, "is that Westbrook International's founding designs, the ones that established this company's reputation for innovation, were not created by my grandfather at all." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. "They were created by William Harmon, a black architect my grandfather hired in 1953, but kept hidden from clients and investors who wouldn't accept a black man as the creative force behind their buildings." Alexander's gaze found Vivian's, something unreadable in his expression. "Harmon was Edward Harper's mentor and the reason your father became an architect." The revelation struck Vivian with physical force. Her father had spoken of William Harmon often, a brilliant mind who had opened doors for him in an industry that had few black architects. But she had never known of any connection to Westbrook. "For 70 years, this company has maintained traditions that no longer serve its future," Alexander continued, addressing the board directly. "Today, I'm proposing we change that tradition fundamentally." He withdrew a document from his suit jacket, placing it on the table. "This is my proposal for restructuring Westbrook International's executive leadership. Effective immediately, I'm stepping down as CEO to assume the role of executive chairman." Gasps erupted around the table. Alexander raised a hand to silence them. "And I am appointing Vivian Harper as Chief Creative Officer, a new position that will oversee all design operations globally while reporting directly to the board, not to me." The silence that followed was absolute. Vivian stared at Alexander in shock, unable to process the seismic shift he had just proposed. "This restructuring eliminates any governance concerns regarding our personal relationship," Alexander continued smoothly, "while ensuring that the most innovative architectural mind I've encountered in 20 years can lead this company's creative future without limitation." Jonathan was the first to recover. "Alexander, this is unprecedented. The chief creative position has always been held by a Westbrook. Until today," Alexander agreed. "Sometimes the most important traditions are the ones we have the courage to change." He turned to Vivian directly. Assuming Ms. Harper accepts the position. All eyes turned to her, awaiting her response. In that crystallized moment, Vivian felt the weight of history, her father's legacy, the brilliance of William Harmon, and her own journey from invisibility to this extraordinary precipice. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "with one condition." Alexander raised an eyebrow, genuine surprise crossing his features. "Name it." "The William Harmon Architectural Fellowship," she said, inspiration striking with perfect clarity. "An annual program providing full scholarships and mentorship to young designers from underrepresented communities. Funded by Westbrook International and overseen directly by the new CCO. A slow smile spread across Alexander's face, not the practiced corporate expression she had first encountered, but something genuine and admiring. "Consider it done." 3 hours later, after the board had approved the restructuring in a narrow but decisive vote, Vivienne stood alone in what would become her new office, a corner suite on the top floor with views that stretched to the horizon in all directions. Alexander found her there, silhouetted against the afternoon light. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. "Processing," she corrected, turning to face him. "You sacrificed your position. Why?" He moved closer, no longer constrained by corporate hierarchies. "I sacrificed a title, Vivian, not my influence. The company remains in Westbrook control, but now its creative future lies in the hands of someone who sees beyond traditional limitations." His fingers traced her cheek with gentle reverence. "My grandfather would have called it good business. I call it long overdue justice." "And us?" she asked, the question carrying all the complexity of their entangled past and uncertain future. "That's entirely up to you," Alexander replied. "As executive chairman and chief creative officer, we are colleagues, equals in every professional sense." His voice softened. "As Alexander and Vivian, we can be whatever we choose to become, without hiding, without shame, and without one of us standing in the other's shadow." Outside the window, the Manhattan skyline stretched before them, a testament to human ambition and architectural vision. Somewhere in that landscape, Edward Harper's unrealized dreams lived on in his daughter's talent. William Harmon's legacy continued in a company finally acknowledging its complex history, and the future of Westbrook International waited to be designed by hands that would shape it with justice and innovation. Vivienne reached for Alexander's hand, their fingers intertwining with a promise that transcended corporate politics and historical wrongs. "I believe," she said softly, "that we have a foundation worth building on." His smile, rare, genuine, and meant only for her, was answer enough. 6 months later, Sheikh Hamdan Al Maktoum stood at the edge of the Persian Gulf, watching as the foundation pilings for the Dubai Crescent were driven into the seabed. Beside him, Vivian Harper pointed toward the horizon where the magnificent structure would soon rise. "Your vision is becoming reality, Ms. Harper," the Sheikh observed with quiet appreciation. "Westbrook International has exceeded our expectations under your creative direction." "Thank you, Your Highness," she replied, the desert breeze catching the edge of her silk scarf, a gift from Alexander before she'd left New York. On her tablet, a message appeared from halfway across the world. The board approved the Harmon Fellowship unanimously. 10 students will begin this fall. I miss you. 3 more days. Vivian smiled, typing a quick reply. This is just the beginning, both for them and for us. As the Dubai sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the construction site, she thought of the security camera image that had first changed everything. Her moment of vulnerability captured and weaponized, now framed in Alexander's penthouse as a reminder that sometimes exposure leads to freedom. She had been invisible once. Now she stood illuminated by possibility, her vision rising from the waters of the Persian Gulf, her future linked with a man who had seen her brilliance even when others had tried to eclipse it. The photograph in her hand, taken just yesterday by the project photographer, showed the first concrete foundation of the Dubai crescent taking shape against the azure waters. On its back, she'd written words that summed up everything, from invisible to indelible. This is how we build a legacy.